I'm sick, but whatever. Just over 2 years after the game's final character reveal, Masahiro Sakurai uploaded a video discussing the development of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. At the end of that video, Sakurai mentioned that he was uncertain about the future of the series, bringing to mind a sentiment he had brought up a few times before. That the everyone is here shtick of the game, and everything that comes with it, is almost certainly a one-time deal. Surpassing or even matching Ultimate's sheer scope would be next to impossible. So when it comes to a brand new entry in the series, scaling back the massive roster is inevitable. And that got me thinking about the thing that, quite frankly, most people in the Smash community are thinking about at this point. What could, or should, the next Super Smash Bros. Game look like? I've seen a few other videos on the subject, but I thought I might throw my hat into the ring. First things first though, I want to make my background and intentions clear. I am not a video game developer, designer, or anything like that, and my experience in such things is limited to a handful of attempts at fan games throughout my childhood, and a couple electives in college. This video is a way for me to bring up what I think are interesting ideas for a future Smash title. By no means am I dictating a strict outline that the industry professionals must follow without knowing all the logistics of developing a game of this scale myself. I'll make some reference to logistical restraints for the sake of direction. Limitation breeds creativity after all. There may be a few points where I misjudge that, but at the end of the day, this video is for fun, not for placing unrealistic expectations upon, once more, industry professionals who know way better than me. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's discuss what we might see in the next Super Smash Bros. Game. We should start off with what may well be turning into a tradition for my Smash videos at this point: tedious semantics. When this topic is debated, the word reboot comes up a whole lot. Typically, this is just used as a catch-all generic term for what we keep saying is the inevitable next step of the series, with a lower number of playable fighters in exchange for focusing on other aspects of the game. But to me, reboot implies a much more drastic change to how the series works, which is another possibility I see brought up frequently. This idea that to make up for not having nearly as many characters as Ultimate, the next Smash game's selling point should be a fundamental shift in its gameplay, like allowing Smash attacks to be used in the air, or giving every fighter a fourth special move, or hell, really going scorched earth and turning the game into a 3D arena fighter. And I don't want to propose any of that. I think there could be interesting new directions with the core gameplay, another tweak to pacing, new advanced mechanics, perhaps renewed attention given to doubles. But when it comes to really rocking the boat with how Smash Bros. Plays, I don't think that's necessary to make a post-Ultimate game worthwhile. And in fact, I believe the insistence that it is necessary kind of sells everything else the series could do short. All of that is to say, as I move forward, imagine this hypothetical Smash 6, or 7, more or less has the same basic gameplay as the others. And after all that admin, it makes sense to officially start with the thing everybody seems to jump to first, and oftentimes the only thing they ever want to talk about: the roster of playable characters. Primarily for that reason, I actually don't want to spend too much time on this section, at least not as much as others might. There are more things to talk about that usually fly under the radar with this community. And plus, the much more interesting way to discuss potential newcomers and reworked veterans is through full moveset concepts, which are obviously worth their own videos. Speaking of which, I do have a folder on Google Drive filled to the brim with Smash moveset ideas, in case I ever wanted to pursue that kind of content. Let me know if that would interest you, I suppose. Nonetheless, I will touch upon the playable roster. In the spirit of scaling back, let's shoot for a maximum of about 50 fighters. That is a fairly generous number with how Sakurai has talked about the subject, but keep in mind that it would still be damn near cutting Ultimate's cast in half. And that's before taking into account that some of those precious slots would go to newcomers rather than familiar faces. And if we're going to cut a good chunk of Ultimate's fighters, the first to go would include a number of third-party guests, who are naturally harder to negotiate for than Nintendo's homegrown icons. Not counting Echo Fighters, Smash Ultimate features 16 playable fighters from third-party series. So let's slice that in half. Again, maybe a bit too lenient given the circumstances, but hey. I'd prioritize cutting the trickier guest characters as well as the less relevant or popular Nintendo fighters, but these self-imposed limits, as reserved as they may be, mean that even some important and beloved combatants would be left behind. As far as newcomers go, don't expect as many internet-breaking, never-ever dream picks as Ultimate. Prioritizing that breed of new challenger was perfect for what that entry was meant to be, but it also meant that a lot of first-party favorites or other potential choices that didn't necessarily carry that feeling were set aside. Here, I'd flip that around a bit. And one final note, none of this is accounting for Echo Fighters. They don't take nearly as much time as other characters to create, and are generally just tossed in as last-minute bonus additions towards the tail end of development, not planned from the start. With all that being said, I guess I should give you a look at my take on a new, trimmed-down Smash roster. Here you go. I managed to come up with a list of 55 fighters, 45 veterans, and 10 newcomers. The latter may seem a bit low compared to pre-Ultimate standards, but keep in mind that another focus of this hypothetical game would be heavily reworking fighters who have needed that for a long time, several of whom to the point of feeling like brand new challengers in their own right. And looking at this image, you might say that many of my decisions are odd, and I'd agree with you. I'm not that satisfied with the result. Every cut character was a difficult move, but I even ended up ditching quite a few of my own favorites. Additionally, the newcomers I've chosen are probably a little too safe and uninspired. I mean, I even have a couple placeholders for new Pokemon and Fire Emblem reps. That's how cookie cutter we're being here. And most of these guys aren't on my personal wish list. To pull back the curtain a tad, I didn't spend too much time or energy carefully crafting this roster. Like I said, I don't want that to be the focus of this video. While I could go through the cast and explain my rationale behind each and every decision, the specifics aren't as important to me as the general gist of it all. The only reason I even put this visual together was because not doing that in a video like this would be a bit of a cop-out. And I ain't no coward. Regardless, I will cover my ass a little by saying that the removed veterans aren't gone for good. We're in the age of post-launch content after all. The best case scenario would be that additional fighters trickle back into the game via free updates. But if that's too unrealistic of an expectation, they could be paid DLC. Hopefully with a significantly lower price tag than newcomers. More on that in a moment. As far as deciding which veterans return, the dev team could just try to gauge interest from afar, but I had another idea. What if there was occasionally an in-game poll where players could choose who they'd most want to see make a comeback? It'd sort of be like a smaller scale, recurring take on the Smash ballot, but this time being accessed from the game itself and with a multiple choice format, which I'm sure would be a lot easier to manage. On the topic of DLC, let's talk about downloadable newcomers. For these, I'd pretty much keep Ultimate's Fighter Pass structure. It might help to be more transparent from the outset about when fans could expect each reveal, but the format works, with each wave of a pass including a new fighter, their home stage with a handful of music tracks, and a host of collectibles based on their series. What are those collectibles? We'll get there when we get there. For now, I think that about does it for an overview of fighters. So, let's jump from one select screen to another. It isn't said as much, but the stage list would also be shrunken down for a new game. Come on, there are well over 100 stages in Ultimate. Even if an overwhelming majority of those are just remasters of old levels, that's a lot. And cutting down could be another step in reallocating resources. And I think with these, you could get away with shrinking down even more. Everyone has their favorite places to fight, but stages generally don't garner the same level of attachment as playable fighters. For that reason, I believe that bringing the list down to 20 to 30 stages is an attainable goal. but I won't even try to show you what that looked like. I simply do not have the same obligation. You can't make me do it again. I ain't no coward. I will give broad strokes once more though. While we should keep a few old untouched favorites, ditching the likes of Pokemon Stadium, Smashville, or Temple may incite a riot, I do think a focus should be placed on brand new and reconceptualized stages. What do I mean by reconceptualized? Take a stage concept that's already been done and go back to the drawing board. 75 meters, for example. Get rid of that garbage and make a brand new stage based on the Donkey Kong arcade game. This time, something that evokes the spirit of that classic title with a layout that actually works for Smash. I think there's a lot of potential in the ideas that resulted in even the worst stages. So this would be a good opportunity to salvage those ideas for something new. Just look at Melee. A lot of its stages were basically new takes on that of Smash 64, and I'd say it turned out pretty well for that game. I also want to touch upon a mechanic surrounding stages: the stage hazard toggle. In Smash Ultimate, the stage hazard toggle gets the job done. It generally does what it says on the tin, and it certainly served its purpose of making some stages competitively legal when they absolutely wouldn't be otherwise. But there are a lot of strange quirks with the feature that make it less than ideal. Unlike the quick switch for Battlefield and Omega forms, the stage hazard toggle is only accessible when creating a rule set, which is the first part of Ultimate's selection process, and thus makes it pretty cumbersome to pick and choose an option on a stage-by-stage basis. This is especially an issue in tournament settings, where TOs and players don't want to bother with the inconvenience and potential problems that could crop up from constantly changing the rule set.
Oops, my finger slipped.
The result being, you only ever see hazards turned off, even if certain stages would be competitively legal and more interesting with hazards on. Furthermore, the effects of the toggle can be inconsistent across the stage list. Traveling and transforming stages are locked to one state. Except when they aren't. Destructible elements can no longer be broken. Sometimes. Moving platforms are made static, or they just don't appear, or they aren't affected at all. This inconsistency is no doubt a product of the ambiguity surrounding what is and isn't a stage hazard, and how that can change drastically between stages based on various circumstances. But all I can think about are situations where I'd want to get rid of certain hazards but keep others, or disable stage elements that currently aren't touched. For a new Smash game, my ideal stage hazard toggle would not only be present on the stage select screen, just like the alternate forms and music, but using it would open a sub-menu that would allow the player to choose specific hazards to turn on or off. For instance, on Wily Castle, players would be able to disable the extra platforms, the Yellow Devil, or just one or the other. This is clearly far more involved than the current system, and I'd imagine has to account for a ton under the hood, which is another reason why I've scaled down the stage list even more than the fighter roster, to make something like this more technically feasible. But should it be successfully implemented, it would make that smaller base stage list far more compelling. Making the stage hazard toggles easier to mess with on the fly and more customizable would open up a world of new possibilities for the competitive scene, silly casual play, and everything in between. When it comes to other multiplayer options, I'd keep Ultimate's new modes like Squad Strike and Smashdown. In case you haven't tried them out, and I've got a hunch that a lot of people haven't, they both make for a very fun twist on the typical Smash battle. In that same vein, I might want to bring back Coin Battle, because why not, and continue to expand upon the now dubbed Custom Smash. I would also like to pitch one brand new type of multiplayer battle: Assist Smash. In this mode, instead of assist trophies being a random item, players select assist trophy characters before the fight, and can then summon those supporting characters on command to perform their signature abilities. Similar to the cameo system in Mortal Kombat 1 or other fighting game assist mechanics. Though, I do think this should stay a side mode, not a universal feature that the whole game is balanced around. But it's a little something that can make the assist trophy characters more substantive and interactive. And it might slightly ease the pain of seeing a potential fighter end up as one. You could maybe even make the assist summon feature available in select single-player modes. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. One major change I'd like to make to all of these multiplayer game modes, which would likely lead to them being used more overall, is to make them available to play online. Wait, did I just say... Okay, yeah, let's talk about online play. Something that the Smash series has consistently screwed the pooch with. In Ultimate, there were clearly attempts to improve the experience compared to Brawl or Smash 4, with customizable rule sets, ranked matchmaking, and an expanded lobby system. However, for the most part, these things haven't panned out as well as one might hope. Having rules and stages beyond what the set criteria of for fun and for glory offered sounds great, until you frequently end up in games with items on when you clearly didn't ask for that. Ranked matchmaking seems like a no-brainer, but global smash power is a literally backwards metric that also appears to shift arbitrarily. And Elite Smash isn't any different from the standard quick play experience outside of a fancier button. The new lobby system, Battle Arenas, is an upgrade to what we had before, but that's a low bar. You can't have tournaments in these arenas, changing the settings is a bother, and connection issues can be heavily exacerbated just by having spectators around. Those connection problems are definitely the most prescient matter, so I'll just state the obvious. The next Smash game needs rollback netcode. I won't get into the details of what that is here. There are plenty of videos and articles on the subject from people way more educated than myself. But in short, it's the preferred approach to online fighting games since it minimizes the problems unique to that genre, at least compared to other options. Smash Bros. Finally embracing rollback netcode would already make for a significantly better online experience, but the other issues I brought up beforehand should also be addressed. Ditch the current GSP metric in favor of a far more straightforward leaderboard and win-loss ratio. Going off of that, I would also incorporate separate ranked and unranked matchmaking like most games already have. The unranked matchmaking could keep a version of the preferred rules feature, though fine-tuned to minimize the chance of ending up in a game with the complete opposite of what you want, while the ranked mode can have a defined rule set and stage spread that reflects what the competitive scene is currently up to. Yes, that would mean Nintendo would need to pay attention to and accommodate that part of the community, something that frankly seems like more of an impossibility with each passing day, but I'm talking about what they should do, and more specifically what I would do with the game here. As for battle arenas, I'd allow them to have custom tournaments, make it easier for the host to adjust the rules, manage the player list, and see whether a player is on Wi-Fi or Ethernet, and finally, throw in some extra features like different backgrounds to choose from. These fixes are so obvious and numerous that I'm kind of boring myself at this point. So let's move on to a completely different side of the game. Alright then, everyone else might want to go on and on about the playable roster or new multiplayer features, but to me, this is the fun part: potential single player, or co-op, content. Though before we leap headfirst into any particular modes, let's jump into the vault to address an overarching aspect of this part of the game: collectibles. From Melee through Smash 4, the main collectibles of the series were trophies. I've talked about this a couple times before on this channel, but my feelings towards trophies are that they peaked in Melee, where a lot of them were unique models actually made to look like figurines. And then they became less and less interesting with each game, as the overwhelming majority of those 3D models were merely ports from the latest games or Smash itself with minimal touch-ups. I don't care about that, I can just go to the model's resource! In Ultimate, trophies were replaced by spirits, which are represented by pre-existing images. I didn't mind this so much as a downgrade, since the 3D models were also mostly reused, and spirits have in-game functionality compared to trophies. But they also dropped the descriptive biographies that trophies had, which is a huge bummer. For this new Smash game, it'd be easy to just say, bring back Melee style of trophies, or give spirits descriptions. But what's the fun in that? Allow me to pitch a brand new take on this type of collectible that I'm dubbing artifacts. Instead of being represented by original 3D models, reused 3D models, or reused 2D artwork, Artifacts would use original 2D artwork created specifically for this feature. Get it? Art effects?
I'm a f***ing genius!
I don't know about you guys, but I love seeing new key art of my favorite characters pop up. And this collectible would offer that same feeling en masse. In regards to art direction, there are a couple ways one could go. Maybe it would be best to nail down a consistent aesthetic for artifacts, like say, having them all be in the style of the gorgeous Smash Ultimate character banner. That would certainly work, but let me propose yet another idea. You know how in the more recent Smash games, Nintendo's partnered with various composers from across the video game industry for the soundtrack? What if they went in a similar direction here, enlisting numerous guest artists to create these character and item images in their own distinct style? That has the potential to be a ton of fun, with a big incentive of unlocking new artifacts being to see how different creators depict game worlds that they may have never even touched before. Now, something like this would almost certainly mean a fewer number of artifacts than there are trophies in Smash 4 or spirits in Ultimate, but I'd like to think that most people would be okay with that in exchange for an increased attention to detail and novelty. Beyond the look of artifacts, I would obviously give them full descriptions. Just a few sentences each like trophies, but that still goes a long way for the museum aspect of Smash, a series that should introduce players to games, characters, and stories that they may not already be familiar with. One new descriptive detail I'd like to tack on though is an indicator of how that character or thing appears in Smash. If they're a fighter, or an assist trophy, or a part of someone's moveset, or just an artifact, or anything else, it's listed here. Just an extra touch to make these things even more comprehensive info dumps. Of course, there are other collectibles that could appear alongside artifacts, with the most notable being Smash 4's custom moves. I wouldn't be opposed if the concept were greatly overhauled. Not in terms of balance necessarily, it'd be cool if custom moves were competitively viable, but I'm okay with them being squarely a casual feature like items and wacky stages. I would just like them to be interesting. Not just copying and pasting the same handful of tweaks like fast but weaker or slow but stronger, but making relatively in-depth variations of a character's special moves that offer a true twist to their playstyle, reference more of their source material, or ideally, both. And it would also help to give custom moves specific unlock conditions and not make it possible to get useless duplicates. Now, how about we get into where one would gather all of this stuff? And here's the most natural starting point. Classic mode is Smash's resident fighting game arcade mode, and honestly, I'd keep the framework mostly the same as Smash Ultimate. That game's approach of giving each fighter their own unique route themed specifically to them, sometimes with a very loose narrative and a boss other than Master Hand and Crazy Hand, that's great. Of course, there's always room for improvement. Classic mode's minigames were absent from Smash 4, but they were brought back for Ultimate. Kind of. All it has is this new take on Race to the Finish, with the level design being minimal and completely unchanged every time. It's tempting to just fill each fighter's route to the brim with a plethora of minigames, but considering that I feel Ultimate's classic mode was a perfect length, I'd instead advocate for it still being one minigame per run, but having the type of challenge change depending on the fighter. It could be target test, board the platforms, race to the finish, or a new climb to the finish, depending on that particular character's moveset, attributes, and history. For example, Mario is a natural choice for board the platforms, someone like Sonic would obviously be well suited for race to the finish, and Link's vast arsenal of tools make him a great fit for target test. In a perfect world, reused level designs would be kept to an absolute minimum, which is hopefully feasible thanks to not having to make a variant of every minigame for every fighter. Another addition to classic mode I'd like to see? Okay, hear me out. I kind of want traditional fighting game character endings. They can be presented in a simple motion comic style, and they don't necessarily have to tie into the story of something we'll discuss a bit later, but I do think that having something like this can provide an extra bit of life to classic mode, and also offer some of that sweet character interaction. For demonstrational purposes, let's take Donkey Kong's classic route in Ultimate, which is themed around the ape traveling from DK Isle to New Donk City. I imagine an ending for that being something along the lines of Donkey Kong winning a mayoral election over some other oddball candidates. And these things really can be that silly, or cute, or dire, or triumphant, or whatever direction best suits the fighter and their route. One more tweak that would be a good idea is a randomize option. Perhaps after you complete a fighter's classic mode route for the first time, you have the option to play as that character in a semi-randomized series of battles instead, similar to older incarnations of the mode. This is another one of those small touches that I think would boost the replayability of the game's single-player content, even if just by a little. A deviation I'd make from Ultimate is the return of traditional event matches. And really, it's always been one of the most consistently solid solo experiences in the Smash series, so I wouldn't want to change too much other than continuing to come up with concepts for events that take advantage of this game's new fighters, stages, and features. One note I'd like to make on them is that scattered throughout the typical event matches, there could be special artifact battles. In Ultimate, while there was no standard event mode, Spirit Battles carried a very similar concept into that game's main single-player content, with the main difference being that these battles' unique stipulations are themed around the spirit in question. I don't want to completely throw out such a cool idea, so now Artifact Battles are a subset of event matches. Though, with there being only a handful of these as part of a bigger mode, we might have room to address one of the major problems with Spirit Battles, that for all their variations in fighters, stages, items, hazards, and the like, the win condition is almost always the same: knock out the opponent. We can mix it up a bit more than that. For instance, an artifact battle based on the roving racers from Super Mario Odyssey could task the player with, well, racing against a group of mini Bowsers to the end of Mario's Board the Platforms challenge. Of course, just like with Spirit Battles or Melee's Trophy Tussle events, winning an artifact battle unlocks the artifact in question. Let's also check out an array of smaller scale modes in the Stadium. For the purposes of this video, the Stadium includes Home Run Contest, All-Star, Mob Smash, and Boss Rush. Home Run Contest can mostly be kept the same, no need to reinvent the wheel there. But I do like how it's been given extra visual flair over the years, so we should keep that up. If you smack the sandbag hard enough in Ultimate, it'll briefly enter space. So let's take that a step further and say if you really send the sandbag flying, it'll end up landing on the moon, which conveniently has its own 100% accurate distance markers. Don't think too hard about it, stupid. On the other hand, a mode that was downgraded going into Ultimate is All-Star, which went from a special endurance gauntlet based on Kirby's Arena to a mere variant of Mob Smash. I get why that was done. With Ultimate's giant roster, the traditional All-Star mode may have been seen as a bit too much. But hey, we just truncated the cast, so no need to worry about that. Simply put, I'd bring back All-Star as it appeared pre-Ultimate, and make it a true challenge again. And by the way, I know that older version wasn't considered a Stadium mode, but I think it fits regardless. With that, let's move on to Mob Smash, which I'm not going to be tinkering with in so few words. I've always found Mob Smash, or Multi-Man Smash, Brawl, Melee, whatever, to be the most underwhelming of the solo regulars, not really offering a style of play too different from standard battling outside of highly neutered reskins of playable fighters. I know that's the point, but I always thought there could be more to it than this. More of a way to provide an experience here that can't be emulated elsewhere in the game. So here's what I came up with. Instead of fighting the Miis, or some other variation of existing characters with limited movesets, Mob Smash would now pit you against an army of unique enemies, the type you might have seen in the series' previous adventure modes or Smash Run. Before you say this is crossing the line of realistic development, almost all of these enemies would be reused from another mode. Again, we'll get to that. To me, this would immediately turn the experience into something far more interesting. The enemies would have all sorts of different behaviors, they could mix and match in unexpected ways, and the concept just makes too much sense for a game all about being a crossover, right? Outside of that fundamental change, I'd carry over the previously seen variants of Mob Smash, assorted enemy counts, time limits, and difficulty levels, with the addition of one: Boss Smash. In this version of the mode, instead of playing as a standard fighter, you take control of one of the game's bosses to survive as long as you can against an onslaught of enemies. I got this idea from one of the closing set pieces of Ultimate's adventure mode, World of Light, where you briefly play as Master Hand to decimate a horde of puppet fighters. As cool as that was, it was always odd that it didn't become available as its own mode and isn't even replayable without starting an entirely new save file. So here, we're taking the concept and adding it to Mob Smash where I think it belongs. On the topic of bosses, I want to briefly touch on Boss Rush, something that should no doubt be included in Smash's Stadium modes. It's honestly shocking that there wasn't a Boss Rush mode in Ultimate, not even being added in an update. It was something that was also part of World of Light's finale, and it became the basis of Sephiroth's classic mode route, but that's it. In another very simple approach, let's just correct that mind-boggling oversight. Let's take a quick detour from playing to making. With the past few entries, Smash Bros. Has allowed its players to create their own content, and I'd like to improve what's already there and maybe even add something new. First, Mii Fighters. I think regardless of how they end up approaching a downscaled roster, the Miis should be here to stay. They're an important part of Nintendo's history and a perfect way of approaching custom fighters in Smash. Frankly, I don't have too much to say about these guys that wouldn't delve into new moveset concepts, but there's room for smaller tweaks too. I'd allow more of the outfits to have their colors changed, because as it stands now, you'd be shocked to see how few of them are actually affected by this setting. I realize that with some costumes based on other characters, there may be mandates disallowing that, but even considering that possibility, surely we can get more than what we already have. And speaking of costumes, bring in more of the so-called deluxe Mii costumes that completely cover the Mii and basically just turn them into the character in question. I don't know who came up with the first one during Ultimate's DLC cycle, but they're a f***ing genius! Stage Builder! For this creation mode, I'd keep the current direction of allowing players to freely draw surfaces, add custom movement paths, and so on and so forth. As unwieldy as that level of freedom and detail can get, it clearly allows for so much more than Brawl's grid-based system. Though, fellas, we need to do a better job of cleaning up the weird collision bugs. The best case scenario would be that the stage builder is so polished that even the competitive scene could take advantage of it. But that requires, polish. So like this can't happen. An actual change that I think would make a huge difference with Stage Builder is more control over the blast zones. The system that's been maintained since Brawl has the player pick between 3 preset stage sizes. But what if this were a bit more freeform? Maybe when you're in the creation process, you could determine the size and shape of the stage's blast zones by simply dragging a box over it, with minimum and maximum limits of course. And on the cosmetic side of things, more background options would be great. In Ultimate, the stage builder offered a few backgrounds from official stages, which is an excellent idea. More of that, please. In the same vein, I'd like to see textures from pre-existing stages be made available for custom stage surfaces, which would hopefully help created stages to look less generic. And to expand Smash's creation suite beyond Miis and stages, how about a new way to customize your game? Costume Designer. This is not a new idea, especially since games like Rivals of Aether have explored this exact feature. And I would have it function here just as it does there. Each fighter has a set of colors, for example Mario's red, white, and blue, and each of those can be changed to a different color. For the record, I like the idea of maintaining 8 alts per character. It works perfectly for the maximum number of players, and it's just a nice bit of consistency. However, it also means that there will always be potential costumes, even just palette swaps, left on the cutting room floor. A costume designer that could add custom palettes for each character beyond the official 8 would help fill out the gaps and, of course, allow players to personalize their favorite fighters like never before. And with the smaller solo play and create modes out of the way, we can move on to the big one. Adventure. A game mode that has served as the main single-player content in each of its 3 appearances, yet is also sort of the chameleon of the recurring modes. It's gone from a replayable 20-minute romp, most comparable to classic mode but with a set order, a loose narrative, platforming levels, and secrets, to a full-fledged story mode with countless cutscenes and almost entirely made up of platforming levels, to missing, to finally a collection of themed battles tied together by a more hands-off narrative, a non-linear map, and light RPG mechanics. I know a lot of people just want them to revisit the subspace emissary structure, but I'm not one of them. That's not just because I was never as in love with Brawl's adventure mode as everyone else, but also because I like the idea of each entry in the Smash series approaching the adventure concept in a different way. So that's the sort of thing I'm going to pitch here, while also incorporating elements from the previous incarnations, and at least somewhat taking into account the unique challenges that have always plagued the implementation of these things. Am I allowed to do that? Am I allowed to not just say Subspace 2? Right off the bat, I'm going to make a concession. I do not think this adventure mode would, or really should, have as many fully animated cutscenes as Brawl's. I know, for a lot of people, getting those juicy cinematics is all they really care about with this sort of thing. But hear me out. There would be full CGI cutscenes at the most pivotal points of the narrative, whatever that narrative may be. I'm not turning this into more of a fanfic than it already is, but otherwise, players' hunger for story, and especially character interactions, could be at least partially sated by dialogue and narration boxes, as well as more of those motion comic scenes. I promise this makes sense in the context of the gameplay structure I have in mind. So let's talk about that. One of the primary reasons I have the unpopular opinion of really liking World of Light is its maps, whether that be the overworld or the dungeons. Yes, they're just flat images with forced perspective, but I still have fond memories of blindly exploring these locations, clearing out more of the fog of war to uncover landmarks, items, puzzles, and more, all in a non-linear fashion. That ended up genuinely feeling like my own personal adventure through the world of Smash, and I absolutely think that's worth carrying on in some form. The map of this new adventure mode, while still top-down, would be presented in 3D, since that'd be a straight upgrade, and it would be punctuated by a handful of towns based on different series that serve as the player's hub, with NPCs to talk to, shops at which to purchase items, stat upgrades, or assist partners, and the ability to switch out one's current lineup of fighters. Venturing outside of these towns is where the mode's core gameplay takes hold. The player may encounter individual battles while traversing the overworld map, which melds iconic settings similar to World of Light, but the main levels are at specific points of the map and can be accessed in a semi-non-linear fashion. These are the elusive platforming levels. There are fewer of them here than there are in the Subspace Emissary, but they're bigger on average and are on Melee's level of being properly themed around the games represented in Smash, down to a bevy of recognizable enemies and bosses. Said themes can combine similar or even contrasting series aesthetics, locales, and foes, an approach that would allow more franchises to be represented in fewer courses and take advantage of being a big crossover. The main goal of the fighters, however, is to get to the top of a central tower. This is a huge exploration-based dungeon that the player can enter at any time during their run, but subsequent blocks are locked behind progression in the surrounding levels. I should mention that the NPCs in the towns, or perhaps elsewhere, may also offer optional side quests that add additional goals to existing levels and the tower, with rewards ranging from consumable items to new playable fighters that otherwise aren't unlocked through story progression. This also helps to keep that main story manageable by not having to include every single character on the roster. And yeah, I think this would be my ideal adventure mode. A content-rich, RPG-like quest that allows players to carve out their own path, features substantial platforming challenges, and really takes advantage of the crossover aspect of Smash, all without needing an hour or more of fully animated cutscenes featuring an overwhelming number of characters. But if that's somehow not enough, I'd like to propose a smaller mode that branches off from this adventure. I'm calling it the Great Labyrinth. Putting that through a thesaurus might bring back some painful memories, but once again, hear me out. It's a procedurally generated complex that uses the framework and assets of the aforementioned central tower. Whenever you progress to the next block, it's a new randomized playground. And no, you don't have the ability to go back to the previously generated blocks. Each floor may generate one or more sub-areas though, which are small sections that reuse assets from the adventure mode's other levels. The collectibles, like artifacts and music tracks, are also randomized, though be aware that you have to proceed to the next block with that loot in order to officially unlock it. Being KO'd will cause you to lose all the loot you've collected in that block up to that point. Outside of the intrinsic pleasure of exploration and battling, finding collectibles that the player may have missed elsewhere in the game is the main purpose of the Great Labyrinth. In single player, that is. There's also a multiplayer variant of this mode where up to 4 players traverse a single randomized block at a time, being tasked with defeating enemies and exploring sub-areas to pick up stat upgrades for a final head-to-head challenge. If that sounds familiar, that's because the multiplayer variant of the Great Labyrinth is the successor to the cult favorite Smash Run mode. Only now, the dungeon's layout is a bit different each time, and players can interact with each other during the exploration phase. Is this all a bit much? Quite possibly, yes. Even with the reallocation of resources and a longer development cycle, this concept for an adventure mode, along with several other ideas I've brought up here, may make for an overly ambitious logistical nightmare. So I'm going to reiterate that this video is not meant to be a strict outline of everything the Smash Bros. Dev team must implement into a single game. My goal first and foremost was to offer up interesting ideas for the future of Smash, and with any luck, I've done just that. I at least know that these are all things that I would enjoy in the game, and if even just one of these concepts kind of sort of wormed their way into the next Super Smash Bros., I'd be elated. And sure, I could continue to spitball ideas forever, from potential art styles, to new items, to more robust training mode options, but I'll turn it over to you guys. If you have your own Smash Bros. Pitches, or amendments to my proposals, feel free to let me know down in the comments. Who knows, maybe taking a look at those could make for a decent video in its own right. Yes, that is the second comment prompt of the video. Am I a real YouTuber yet? A big thank you to my channel members, Antus Munchie, Cha, Satellaview, Tibby, and Tim Fillion. Your support means the most.